Hi everybody. Today what I'm going to talk to you about is about how to use transitions and transforms to add a little visual spice to your web pages. I'm going to start off talking about transitions and what they do, and then I'll talk a little bit about transforms at the end. What a transition is basically is it's a property that allows you to fluidly change uh, from a property when you hover over an object or when you click on it or otherwise give it focus. So, for example, right now I've got this button ID and also a selector and a button hover selector, right? You'll notice that they're pretty much identical except that this one has a background color of snow and this one has a background color of tomato. So that when I hover over the button, it changes color and that lets me know that it's something I can click on, right? See, like that. But it happens all of a sudden. As soon as I put my mouse over it, it changes, right? And there are some things that might look better if it kind of had a little bit more of an animated feel. What a transition does is it kind of manages the change from white or from snow to tomato. So let me show you how to implement that. I'll start off with a simple one, and then we'll get a little bit more complex as we go. So if I want to do a transition, what I do is I type transition property, and then the name of the property I want to change. In this case, because I want to change the background color from snow to tomato, I'm going to type background color. Then what I need to do is I need to decide how long should it take to move from the old property to the new one. And then in this case, I'm going to say, let's make it 5 seconds. So I do transition duration 5s for 5 seconds. And I also need to copy this over to the button hover selector so that it happens both ways, both when I put my mouse over the button and when I take my mouse off of the button. So I'm going to save the change and then refresh, and you'll see when I put my mouse over, it slowly changes from white to tomato. And if I think, well, that's kind of too slow, what I can do is I can go back here and I can say, okay, let's make that 2 seconds instead of 5. So I'll save it and refresh, and look, it happens much more quickly now. So that's a really basic transition, and that can work for anything. It could work for height, width, the position on the page. I could change the font. Um, I can um, I can do a lot. There are other things that I can do that we'll talk about later, but basically, it's a good way to kind of give it more of an animated feel. Like let's uh, now try height. I'll show you what that looks like. Now, I can change more than one property at the same time. I can have a whole list of properties here, like transition property. I can do background color and add a comma and then do height as well, right? And I'll do that down here, height. And then I'll say when I put my mouse over that button, it should be 90 pixels tall instead of 30. And I'll save my change and refresh. And you see there it increases in size. When I take my mouse away, it decreases in size. And it has that nice animated feel. Um, and once again, if I change the transition duration, if I make it 5 seconds, it's going to take longer to animate. So you can see when I put my mouse over, it takes a while to get from one uh, state to the other. And that's too slow, so I'm going to change it back again. Now, there might be some cases where you don't want people putting their mouse over something and having it start to move and then move back. It might get kind of annoying. So what you can do is you can add a delay. You can say, don't start actually doing the transition until the mouse has been over um, the button for, half a second. The way you do that is you type transition delay. And I said half a second, so I can do 0.5 s. And I'll do the same thing down here. I'll just copy it from the top. Then can go back here and refresh the page, and you'll see that it doesn't start changing right away. And maybe it's easier to see if I change that delay from 0.5s to 5s. So see, I've got my mouse over there, and it's not doing anything until now. And the same thing, I took it off, and it's not doing anything just yet. And there it goes. And something else to keep in mind is these values don't have to be the same. So for instance, let's say I want it to take 5 seconds before it changes, but I want it to go back immediately. I can get rid of this transition delay, or I can make it 1 second. Doesn't matter. Let's try getting rid of it just so you can see what happens when I do that. So I refresh the page and I put my mouse over, and it's going to take a while, but eventually it's going to start changing. There you go. And now I take my mouse away and it immediately goes back to the way it was. So yeah, they don't have to be identical, but if you do want it to act identically, then you need to make sure that you have the lines both in the original state and in the other state, the hover state or the active state or whatever it is. Finally, there's one more thing you need to know about transitions. You can also set it so that it has you can set what it's called a timing function. So it's transition timing function. And there are several of these, and it's easiest if you just look it up, but the short version of this is that you can affect how the transition moves from one state to the next. So for instance, there's a transition function called ease out. And what it does is it animates at a kind of constant rate, and then towards the end it slows down a little bit, so it kind of eases out before it finishes. And it's kind of imperceptible, but if you do it fast enough, you can see, yeah, it slows down a little bit at the end. It kind of makes it appear to be smoother. So, oh, I'm going to get rid of this 5-second delay. That's going to get annoying for me. So you can see at the end it slows a little bit before it finishes up. Otherwise, it can seem a little abrupt if you don't have that ease out. You can do the same thing where you do ease in, where at the beginning it kind of slowly ramps up and then gets going. Take a look at the W3 Schools page to take a look at the different timing functions, and you can kind of experiment with those and see which one works best for you. So you have all of these different transition properties, and you can kind of see how they work. Well, so what kind of cool stuff can you do with them? Well, let's try showing you what happens if I want to click on this div here to make it the state change. So right now I've got container, the blue div here, and then container active. So you can see that the background colors are different when I click. I can also set the widths to be different when I click. I can make this 900 when I click, or I can make it 400. Like that. And if I do a transition property, I can select background color and width, and transition duration 2 seconds. And I don't want to change any of the other properties. So you'll see if I refresh, when I click, I'm holding down the mouse button right now and it changes, and as soon as I let go, well, it didn't animate because I didn't add that transition property to the other container. So I will copy and paste that in and save it and refresh. And now you see it animates that way. And when I let go of the mouse button, it animates the other way. So doing a transition on active can be problematic because most people, when they click, they only click for, a half a second or so. And this is what that looks like. It moves a little bit, but not much. So you might not necessarily want to depend on active for transitions. Or if you do, maybe you make it move really quickly. Don't have a transition duration of 2 seconds. Maybe have it be half a second or something like that so that the transition happens fairly abruptly. See? So what else can you do? Well, as you saw when I put my mouse over this picture, I made it grow, right? So I can actually, I can show you a little bit about that, and as I show it to you, I can talk to you about transforms. So here's my image selector. I'm going to get rid of this. Here's my image selector, and you'll notice that when I hover over it, um, the scale changes. So what I've got here is a WebKit transform property. What that does is it changes the scale of the image. What transforms can do is they can do cool stuff like change the scale of an element, or they can rotate it. There are a few different transforms that you can use. There's one called skew, I think. You can take a look at the W3 Schools webpage for transforms to see a whole list of them. I'm going to give you the basic idea on how to use them, and then you can experiment with it later. Basically what you have to do is you have to say, you have to do two things. You have to create a WebKit transform property, and then you also have to create a transform property as well. This WebKit one is what allows the transform to work in both Safari and Chrome, and this other transform property will allow the transform to work in everything else. So basically, every time you want to do one of these transforms, you have to do it twice. Kind of a bummer, but it's all right. After the WebKit transform, you see I have scale. Scale says, like, I want to change the size of something. Now this image that I have over here is actually really huge. It's probably the full size of my screen if I were to let it be the full size. Um, and I didn't want it to be the full size of the screen. So I said, I want to make the scale normally 0.1. So in other words, 10% of its normal size. And it automatically shrinks it to the size I want, which is pretty cool. Then when I hover over the link, I've got this WebKit transform here, and I'm also going to copy this in and get rid of the WebKit so that it'll work in Firefox and Internet Explorer. And when I put my mouse over it, rather than it being 0.1, it's 0.25. So in other words, it is 25%, which means that it gets bigger when I put my mouse over it, right? That's nice. So that's pretty useful. Like if you want to have images get enlarged without people clicking on an image, you could do it with scale, and it would make it grow. However, once again, it would look cooler if it was if we used a transition animated. So I am going to do a couple different transitions. I'm going to use transition property of left, top, and WebKit transform. These are all the properties that I want to change. You notice I've got WebKit transform property here, and then left and top, which positions the image. That will pretty well cover me. And then I'm going, oh, I also need to use transform so that Firefox will also work. And then I'm going to transition timing function of ease out, transition duration of 1.5 seconds, and a transition delay of 0.25 seconds. So that way, if anybody moves their mouse over it by accident, it doesn't freak out. So I'll copy and paste that over here too, and save it, and refresh the page. And then when I put my mouse over, you see it grows and it shrinks. A nice little animated feel. On my computer, it's a little jerky. You'll just have to take my word for it. On most computers, it's really smooth. So pretty nice, right? Now, you've got plenty to play with, so get to it and see what you can figure out. Thanks.